Okay, first thing I'll say, welcome everybody to the May edition of the Tips and Tricks SIG Special Interest Group. Our format is typically open forum. Then we'll go into a discussion about some of the topics that I'd sent out to everybody. I'm going to be including in the chat in just a moment the topics, unedited version with all the links in there. And that should be coming through right now. Okay, with that being said, we're going to open up with the first question of the evening, but we're going to first segue to Bob, who wanted to make a correction on some information that was given to Dennis at the Keeping Up with Tech meeting. So Dennis, I believe you were having a question in regards to age verification from Google, and you were wondering if your account had been hacked. And we as a group some of us in the group were tending to believe that maybe you were hacked for this requested information. But Bob would like to clarify. Bob?
In April of this year, Google expanded their verification API to include age verification. There are various circumstances under which this trigger can be tripped. I don't know how it works on a Chromebook because I retired mine quite a while ago. And Chrome OS does have the age verification API, meaning that this screen can pop up. Google has forever had a way of verifying your identity if you got locked out of your account. And that was this page. And you would submit a scan of an official ID. In some cases, they would accept a face scan. And it would go through a third party. So this is just, I believe, an adaptation of something they already had available. How your trigger got tripped, I don't know.
It was more than something on the screen. They first sent me an email saying they want some age verification.
Can you find that email?
Yeah. Let me look here.
We do a little forensic work here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let me find some things. Plus, I have another question, so I'll do some sharing here in a moment.
Okay.
Stuff here.
Now, there are official emails they will sometimes send about this sort of thing, if there's been a change in their policy.
Okay.
So what happens if you don't give them the information that they are looking for? Oh, somebody's got some TV or background sound going. Wayne, I think it might be you.
No?
Yes, it is.
Yes?
There you go.
Oh, wait. It goes away when Drew goes away.
Okay. Because my screen was lighting up on Wayne. That's why I was saying Wayne.
Right.
Okay.
There may be two.
Dennis, you got the info?
Yeah, I got some. I couldn't find the first email, but I found the second. So let me share. Entire screen. Okay. Oh, that. Okay. Got it. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So this is, I couldn't find the first email, but this is the second one.
We're not seeing anything yet.
Okay.
Okay, so this was the second one.
We updated your settings.
Yeah.
That's not going to help. You know why? We need the first email, if we can, so that you can hover on some links.
Oh, boy.
Including the sender.
Go back to your inbox and just search email and type in Google.
Well, here's the thing. Let me just say this. It says it couldn't confirm I'm an adult. Then here it says safe search is on. So I did go into my settings and I did confirm that safe search had been turned on. I confirmed that. So somebody actually changed something in my system. Just like they said, we've updated your settings. Let me go back.
Was this before or after you dismissed that
No.
screen asking for submission of?
Oh, shit.
I may have initially looked at the screen and then not followed through with doing anything on it.
And that would have triggered that exact email you just got. It's legitimate.
Let me do a search for Google and see what I get. Because maybe
you do have something from Google Ads, but that's probably not it.
Yeah, I saw that. Oh, wait.
Oh, here it is. Please verify your age.
Okay. Display images. Okay, here it is. You recently started verifying. Well, that's a different. That's
you got 3 emails then.
Yeah. Then after I looked at it, after I saw that safe search had been turned on, I said, well, okay, somebody's going on. Let me look at what they want. And that's when I looked at the page that said, hey, we need a photo ID, or we need your picture or something. So then they sent me this telling me that they're aware that I started to look something, but then I didn't do it.
Was there an email before that screen showed up?
Well, just the initial ones. These, let me look.
What I'm seeing is you updated your settings came before that one.
Yeah, here's the settings on April 24th. And this one here, April 30th, is later, which is the one saying, oh, you started to do it, but then you didn't do it.
Do you have one earlier than April 24?
Man. No, that's
security
the
alert, new sign in.
Security alert. Did you do anything? Wait, it says there was a new sign in.
Well, I signed in on my Linux to my Gmail. That's all that one is.
Normally that doesn't trip any triggers.
Yeah, well, I'll hit it. It just says a new sign in on Linux that I signed in.
And then
I have gotten those. Well, maybe it's the first one. I don't know.
Did you check your activity with the link at that time?
Say that again.
Did you check your activity the way they recommended? Did you hit that link?
No, I did. I knew it was correct, so I didn't hit anything here.
You did nothing. Okay.
Yeah,
so at this point, it looks like this is a legitimate request from Google.
It does appear to be so. We still don't know what triggered it.
We don't know what triggered it. So if he doesn't find any problems with the fact he's got a restricted account, then he doesn't have to do anything. If he feels that it's preventing him from doing what he wants to do on the internet, then he may need to update his DOB on the file.
Well, let me say one more thing. Subsequent to all of this, I went back into my settings and I tried to shut safe search off.
Yeah.
And I think it did finally shut off.
Did it succeed finally?
I believe it did. I was trying to check those settings here.
Check it right now.
Security and sign in. I think it was in here, but when I was looking, I couldn't find it. It says no two-step, last password change. Skip password when possible. I turned that to off. I found that's related to using passkey or something like that.
Could be. So did you succeed in changing that setting?
I did. And then
That's a security setting, so you're probably okay.
And I turned this one on just a few days ago where I wasn't aware of this setting before on the Chromebook. Enhanced safe browsing.
Oh, you did turn that on.
So, just within the past couple of days. Just within the past 2 days, I turned that on.
Would someone like
Personally,
to, before we move, can someone tell us more about what that does or doesn't do?
unfortunately, what that is it's a further restriction on where you can go on the internet with your Google account and with your browser. It sends you, it'll put up a block against what it considers to be dangerous websites. It will put up a block against certain downloads and certain extensions. So, just for fun, we might want to see what happens if you try to turn that off, and you can turn it back on again if you like.
Yeah, I hit learn more. It should be showing here, but I don't know why it's going so
It'll
slow.
take a while for that to load.
So can someone give us an example of a site that it will give you a pop up and say, no, maybe you shouldn't go here?
If it does not have HTTPS, that's one main thing that'll do it.
Ah,
If it's a site that's been reported as a bad site or a bad IP address, it won't let you go there. Personally, I keep all safe search off because I trust myself. But
yeah, I have a few programs on my computer that periodically will block access to a site it thinks is unsafe.
yeah,
Oh, and let me add one more thing. So when all this initially happened and it told me that Safe Search was on, I was on a YouTube website, and I don't remember if it was about Linux or if it was about I was researching how to fix a talking Snoopy thing. I was on some site which, is very innocent site, and
yeah.
I got kicked off the site. And that's when I kind of realized that Safe Search was preventing me.
Fixing a Snoopy would not be something they would be concerned about a grown-up accessing or a child.
Yeah, but it was a YouTube. But it was
unless there are similar sites that are kind of NSFW.
Yeah, but it was YouTube, definitely.
Yeah, YouTube has some kind of strange rules about what is restricted content.
Okay.
But
well, anyway, I think I'm past it now. I'm kind of waiting to see. I haven't been rejected from any sites so far, but I'm pretty much only a YouTube kind of site person.
I'd like to see whether, you are using, I see, Paramount Plus. That's an app, and that can kick in age verification in jurisdictions where it's required for things like the Google Play Store.
I haven't activated that in months. My wife put that on here because she has it, and sometimes I'd like to see a show and she put it on here, but I haven't used it for months.
Yeah, but has she on this computer?
We each have our own Chromebook, so no.
But they share an account.
Yes.
So
yeah, true.
you set up in the account in Peacock or Paramount. You set up an age level of what you'll be wanting to view, some form of age verification. So they know that if you're a kid, you should only get kid shows. If you're an adult, you can get anything.
Does Paramount Plus do that?
I would assume that any streaming service is going to do something along the line of some type of age. It's not necessarily for verification. It may be just for sending you content.
Okay.
I don't know. I don't have Paramount, so I can't answer that one.
It's plausible.
I wanted to say that Malwarebytes won't let you go to a HTTP site, and I think Brave Browser also won't. So
I've had Firefox do the same thing.
So I mean, I think the browsers stop that part on their own.
Plugins do it too.
Yeah, plugins. There are extensions and plugins that'll do it.
There are usually various settings within the browsers themselves that will either restrict you to HTTPS, and you will have to try and go around that, or it will allow everything through, whether it's got the S or not. So you have to look at your settings on security.
Mm-hmm. And it's a matter of what's your risk, your level of risk tolerance, what you want to do about that.
Mhm. Actually, you know what I did in addition to that you can do independently is there is a program or a website called AdGuard, and they provide a free DNS service that you can to block content, or it automatically blocks content advertising. And you go into your router and you use their DNS rather than your internet provider's DNS. And then I get a weekly report that shows me everything that it blocked.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, shall we go on to a new question, new direction?
Oh, what happened?
All right. Somebody had another question for the group?
I do.
Dennis, you don't get two a night,
This was Bob's. This wasn't mine. No, a few meetings back, I was mentioning a friend of mine had problems with trying to McAfee, try to do it, uninstall McAfee because he has Norton, and it seemed to have remnants there. So you guys suggested, go to the McAfee website and download the tool. So he did that, and he contacted me today to tell me the problems that he's having. So I wanted to share those. Maybe get some other ideas.
You couldn't get this gentleman to just come to our meetings?
I asked him if he wanted to. He declined this time. But if we don't have any answers, maybe I can get him to come once. But
that's the idea.
Well, another thought.
You got to do better on sales.
Another thought is Revo uninstaller. It gets rid of most things.
So here's something I didn't know. He's on Windows 10, and whenever he starts up his machine, this message is the first thing he sees every single time. He hits OK, and then after that, and by the way, it takes a long time for this to come up. The machine's super, super slow. And everything he does, super, super slow. That's why he doesn't even use it's his wife's computer. She's hardly ever able to use it because it's so slow. But after he hits OK, it'll work again. Everything seems fine, but slow. So I asked him if he downloaded the tool and ran it. He said he did. And he said when he runs the tool, he gets this message.
Incomplete. That means it wasn't taken out. So he would have to run it again, probably as the administrator of the machine. You're talking about administrative privilege versus user privilege.
That's one thing. The other thing,
he also hit this view logs down here. He says nothing seems to come up. I want to mention that. Okay.
Yeah. The other thing that needs to be done with many of these tools is you have to go into safe mode as administrator and run it there as administrator from an administrator account. In other words, you have 3 different levels. Safe mode stops the service. The service will stop the uninstaller. So you have to stop the service to stop the to start the uninstaller.
Okay. Safe mode is just a boot issue. When you're booting up, you hit whatever it is. F2.
The way I do it is I log out, and I would normally be going to restart, but I hit the shift key and restart.
Yes, that's what you do is hold down the shift key and then restart.
Hold the shift key first. Hold down shift and then hit restart.
Shift restart. Then you will be instructed to choose, and the option you choose is troubleshoot. And then it will reboot again. And I believe it's option 5 that would be safe mode with networking. 4 would be just safe mode.
Right.
Well, yes.
And then it reboots again.
After the troubleshooting, he has to go to advanced options.
Yeah.
Then you select about the startup. And then you can say, I want to be able to get into safe mode or safe mode with network. And then it'll reboot and come up in the safe mode you selected. And usually you are required to sign in as the administrator. And usually it will not allow you to sign in as a user.
Okay.
Right. And then even when you're in there, you still have to run the uninstaller as administrator from your right-click menu.
Well, when you're in safe mode like that, you'll be able to see the uninstall program?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
They're designed so you can.
Okay.
You
Any
can see them.
file that you can see as a user or as a regular logged in administrator can be seen by safe mode, period.
The
Got
main
it.
difference is some programs require services that are not present in safe mode, but these programs are designed so you can run them in safe mode, and they want you
Yeah.
to run them there.
Yeah. Another thing that you can do is if you download the auto runs program, it has a search box, and you could search for the word McAfee, and it will show you any registry entries or startup items or anything where McAfee is listed, and you can delete them.
Actually, you don't delete them, you uncheck them, and that means,
Uncheck them, yeah.
yeah, they
Uncheck
won't,
them.
that way when you reboot, they will not run those services.
Yes.
Doesn't Revo uninstaller pretty much do that for you?
No,
No,
You don't think it does?
I-
Doesn't get rid of all that
No.
leftover stuff?
not with
Okay.
Donna, not
No.
with McAfee and not with
Oh.
Horton.
Okay.
Now,
Yeah.
that was the
All
key
right.
here.
Hmm.
McAfee is the one that seems to be the culprit here that Revo does not do as good of a job on. And I would also want to add in, once you go through a uninstall process, whatever program you're using, then you try to come back with Revo to complete out the process. I do not believe Revo can find the files that are associated with it because you uninstalled the program. So the pointers associated with it, it may not find.
Right.
if you pay for an upgrade, there is a hunter mode. I don't know if
Yes.
that's in the free.
Yeah. Hunter mode requires that you have a remnant, like a McAfee folder, that even if it's empty, it will. I have the licensed version of Revo, and I tried to uninstall McAfee one time, and it failed. And I contacted tech support, and they told me that it would only work properly if I was in safe mode.
Well, the other key there is certain files in the installation of McAfee and Norton are very protected because of the fact that there are hackers and some pieces of malware that if they get into your system, they can turn off or remove any antivirus protection that you have. So to try and protect against that, Norton and McAfee did some extra protection. That's why you have to have the other special tool each of them has to totally remove everything.
Yeah, but if you do have remnants, Revo Uninstaller has its hunter mode. There are other uninstallers. You may get something for free that'll do something like that. The question I have about Revo is, can you also in hunter mode target a registry entry if you see a name that says McAfee?
I'm in the middle of trying to go into Revo Uninstaller Pro is already running. Where the hell is it running?
Yeah, the question is, can it target registry entries or folders?
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to figure out right now. Open the main window. And if I say hunter mode, oh, hunter mode brings up um, it shrinks the program down and then makes you click on something.
Right.
And you have to have a remnant of McAfee to click on.
Right. It's like crosshairs in a scoped rifle or pistol. And so the end result is you use that new cursor to go find the actual remnants that you're looking for, click on it, and theoretically it can remove it. I've never tried the registry though.
Now, Revo has another option called forced uninstall. And forced uninstall brings up a menu, and you can just type in the word McAfee and hit next, and it will search for. And Revo has a database of apps, and so when you do that, and you type in the word McAfee and hit next, it automatically knows how to scan your registry and your file system for remnants of McAfee.
So do you have to know which McAfee version it is? Which type of McAfee?
If you have an actual remnant file, it gives you the option to point it to the file.
Yeah.
That will help it identify the program, or it has an option. You just type in the word McAfee.
Yeah.
And hit next.
So it'll look for any McAfee remnants, which is good.
Yeah.
I use Geek Uninstaller, and its free version has a forced uninstall as well.
Yeah, but the forced uninstall didn't exist until the last several years.
Geek Uninstaller has had it for quite a while.
Have you done a side-by-side on the two, Bob?
Geek Uninstaller just simply offers more things for free than Revo, but it may not be as good a tool. It may not be as efficient. Their database, of course, will be a bit different, and the way they list programs is a bit different. I'm thinking I might be able to bring up Geek Uninstaller.
They generally look similar and function similar, but it may not be absolutely identical.
Yeah. Give me a sec here. No. Okay. Yeah, I've got it up, and you'll be able to, if I were to share my screen, I could show what Geek's main screen looks like. So let me just give a quick glimpse of it so you can see it. Let me just share this. Come on.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're seeing Geek Uninstaller. And let me move it down here to where it can be seen better. And if I were to go here, there is a force removal. There's registries, and that would look for all the registry entries. And there's an installation folder you can go for, and you can Google for it. In this case, Google for that. Or if I needed to get rid of this guy, I could Google for its program name. And McAfee would be similar. So there it is.
When Geek Uninstaller came out, I used it for a while, but I stuck with Revo. But I mean, at the time I did the testing, they didn't have the forced uninstall.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There has been within the past couple of years at least one upgrade.
Yeah.
But that forced uninstall has been there for about the past 5 or 6 upgrades. So it's been a while, hasn't it, Tim?
And we move on to a new topic.
Okay.
New question, new direction. Pete's got something for us.
How did you read my mind?
Because I just saw that inquiring look.
The inquiring mind is I need a search parameter because next week I've got to restore back to almost factory settings, a Windows 10 machine in front of a bunch of kids. So what do I search on YouTube or for instructions? Because it's been at least 2 years since I've done it.
So you want to reinstall Windows or you want to do a factory reset?
A factory reset.
Haven't played with that in a long time.
May I ask why?
Why? Because I want to get rid of all the files and all the users, and I want to reset everything back.
Right. It's kind of like
Why? Because it's going to go to a different church to be used with a laser printer. Not a laser printer, a laser cutter.
Okay, to back up, these were the machines that you built to give to the school, right? The kids to use at school?
No, those were factory brand new when we got them to the school. This is a different same school, but these were ones they took out of service 2 years ago because they weren't upgradable to Windows 11. So they gave me a couple that was going to go to recycle, and I restored them back then to 10 factory so I could put new users' names and get rid of all the school settings. And I want to restore it back to that point. So I know they work, and I know they work with the software that the other church is going to use.
I think I came across an article within the last 30 days that's ringing a bell in my head right now. And I just don't have it at offhand. I would have to research it again in my collection and let you know.
It's pretty simple according to Mr. Google. I put in the chat here that you open settings, navigate to system recovery, and click reset PC.
Okay.
Yep.
And then you could choose to keep your files or remove everything like a full wipe.
Is that for 10 or 11? It is true for 11. I don't think it's available in 10.
Actually,
is this 11 or 10?
Actually, this is very similar.
Wait, I didn't hear Pete's response. Pete, was that 11 or 10?
That was 10.
It was 10. Okay.
Yeah, and I did the same search on Windows 10, and it's almost identical.
It probably is identical. Yep, it's identical. Update the security, recovery, get to started. I mean, just how you get there is almost the same. It's similar.
Yeah.
Here, I'll put this in the chat.
Yeah, and there are various YouTube videos that show the same thing.
Yeah. This came up yesterday, and that's why.
So it's pretty simple to do, but you do have to make a choice. Are you going to reset this and erase everything, or keep some of your data?
No data. No data is going forward.
Okay.
Another thing that you do is download USB ISO file, or make a USB boot file of Windows, and when you boot off the disk, it'll have an option to reset the PC.
Right.
Well, it's not the same as reset. To reinstall, it'll put a brand new copy. From inside Windows, you do a reset. From the C or USB, you would use reinstall. And then that way, when the person turns the computer on for the first time, they'll be prompted to create a login account and do all that stuff.
Yeah.
Anyone else want to comment on this?
The reset option is also available if you made recovery media for Windows 10. And you can do that up until the time you decide you want to wipe it.
Yep.
So you can make a recovery USB. But In your case, probably the ISO from the Windows Media Creator would be just as good, if not better.
Does that help, Pete?
Yes, it does.
We're at the price of admission here. That's why you pay the big bucks to be a member here.
You mean sitting here and taking the crap?
Anyways, next question, new direction. Harry, you got a question for us?
No question, but when you get to number 7, I'm going to be paying close attention.
Ah, okay. Well, we know Bob wants to talk about number 7 for sure. So,
yeah, another user group just had a presentation all about that.
And we'll get to there, but we haven't started. We're still in the open forum here.
Right.
So I'm just going through the group here, making sure anybody got any questions or problems, machines. If not, we'll go into our topics for the evening. Okay. Well, since for one thing, I sent out to the group, please tell me that you did not receive the topics I put in the chat. I threw a file out in the chat.
I got that file and loaded it, but it didn't have the URLs for each and every one of them.
No, some of them aren't URLs. You'll see descriptors in there, right?
Yeah.
That is in the one I sent in the chat, not the one I sent in the email. The email just had a list.
Yeah.
Because some of these things I looked up for topics to discuss, there was no specific link to an article to walk through or a website. So I was just coming up with the keystrokes or the commands that were needed to go through those topics. So that's why it's done a little differently this time. I did not have access. I created this one before I got any FYIs from Tim. So it's a little different this time. That being said, who'd like to pick a topic that's in group?
Before we go past number 7, I just put into the chat a website that a friend of mine has used many times. He just bought a brand new to him, MacBook, and it's a place called Back Market. And apparently they are very reputable and reliable for purchasing used equipment.
Funny you should mention that. In another user group, one that Drew, you've probably attended a few times, here in Lexington, Massachusetts, we have a group that calls itself LCTG, Lexington Computers and Technology User Group. And they have a fellow who's really instrumental in doing our group wiki, and you can ask later what a wiki is. But anyway, it's basically a website where people contribute to a common document. And Steve Eisenberg is his name. And he had a slideshow. And I can share a few slides that he did quite recently, about a week or two ago, about how he would recommend things to consider about buying a used or refurbished PC. We can start with Back Market, which is already on our screens.
Right. I wanted to at least pull this one up, and then I'll segue into you, Bob, since Drew had brought up this Back Market, which I've never heard of before. So someone want to elaborate a little bit about this company? Don't know anything about the reliability of what they're selling.
I haven't purchased anything, but I know that my friend Steve Eisenberg has purchased iPads and MacBooks. He's got a brand new MacBook that he just bought. You can return items that arrive broken. They don't have a problem taking back equipment that's not right.
Has anyone else worked with Back Market?
I haven't worked with them. I knew of them. But most of the major manufacturers of computers have an outlet store that is
Yes.
for refurbished, returned equipment that had problems. They fix it and then they put it on the outlet version of their website. So you have, like say Dell, HP, Apple, etc. They have the outlet site that you can go to and get refurbished equipment from that at a substantial discount.
Yeah.
Hey, Drew, I'm kind of curious. You said your friend bought. Did he say anything about prices for them versus maybe other places he looked at?
Most recently, no, because he's been using that site for years and he trusts it. And so I don't, he may check other places and do comparisons. I don't know. But
he gave a more complete explanation of his process and what kind of comparisons he made in his slides.
Personally, I purchased a used Chromebook from Amazon, and the first one came in had a broken webcam, and I shipped it back to them. They took it back and gave me a different one.
Yeah, most of them are quite reputable from the manufacturers on the equipment. And because it was returned with a problem to begin with, they cannot sell it as new any longer. It has to be classified refurbished, and therefore you get a discount, but it varies based upon the manufacturer's refurbished policy. I will tell you, usually an Apple product will be higher than what you would pay for a PC-based computer, simply because the higher originating cost of Apple products and the loyalty of those who are in the Apple environment. They retain a lot of real value compared to a basic PC machine.
Yes, but what Steve has also noted is older Macs hold up very well, and they are still eligible for newer Mac OSs longer than many PCs qualify for Windows. And for that reason, by spending under $1,000, he was able to obtain a really decent older Mac, and it still holds up, and it can still get updated.
Well, the build quality of Apple puts all the PC-based builds to shame. I guarantee you that because I have two old Macs from around 2011 or 12, and every time I've gone into those machines in the past, the build quality is outstanding. The bad part is most of Apple's offerings are not the greatest for repairability, which is a factor that some people do apply when they are out buying a new computer. How repairable is it? How upgradable is it? And Apple gets lower marks there than, say, most other systems.
So let's move on the subject here, which is places to purchase used equipment at. If you look in the chat, two places that came to mind to me is CDW and Dell. They've both been selling refurbished computers for decades. So to me, it's a reliable supplier, and they already have a supply chain that's already dedicated to refurbished equipment. Whether or not you like what they sell is another story. CDW generally has a lot more commercial or business related products. Dell will have a mixture of business as well as non-business equipment.
Yeah, the Dell stuff, I have bought a couple in the past from Dell Outlet. I've also bought off of eBay refurbished equipment. In some cases, the one thing you want to watch for is if it's a regular refurbished type business, or is this a seller's refurbish? And a seller's refurbish should put up a caution flag. In most cases, it works just fine, but at the same time, too, it's not the normal business model of that particular.
So when you said seller refurbish, are you referring to something like an eBay item
Yes,
versus a
yes,
CDW item?
that's right.
Okay, that was kind of what I was the two sites that I put up there, it's not necessarily an endorsement, it's just saying these are legitimate places
Oh,
that have
yeah.
been doing this for decades.
But there are eBay places that are
Yes.
absolutely legitimate refurbishers of old business equipment as well. And it's just the case where, in some cases, when you're buying some pieces of equipment, there may be a regular vendor of various equipment that did a self refurbishing, and that usually note that in the advertisement.
Wow.
Bob, you wanted to take the reins from here and continue on this discussion.
Yeah, hang on a sec. And I'll get to where my version of the slides. This. Okay. Now I can do a share of my screen and bring it up. So in addition to, and also we've covered some of this, Steve was talking about there's a disclaimer and there's value criteria, value, risk management, real world performance, and examples using a $1,000 budget, which is pretty reasonable. So what does refurbished mean? Previously sold device, returned, inspected, tested, repaired, resold with a warranty, different from used as is. Where they come from? Corporate lease returns, customer returns, open box, excess inventory, warranty replacements, customer trade-ins and trade-ups. Why consider it? You can get a 20 to 50% cost savings. There's your cost comparison versus new. High-end models can become affordable, especially the business models and the Apple models. There's lower depreciation. In other words, most of the depreciation in a computer happens before someone would ever resell it. And especially for businesses, they're not going to fall in value very much over the time you will own them. Benefits the environment rather than having e-waste or recycling. So there are some risks. There can be battery degradation, although in many cases you can just get a new battery. Cosmetic wear, scratches, dings and dents. You'll have older CPUs, and that may limit OS support, particularly with Windows. Some mitigations, there are warranties. Aim for 6 to 12 months. A return window, aim for 30 days. And then there's the seller reputation, which we've been discussing. And there's some buying criteria. Where to get? Back market, we've just discussed. Best Buy has a refurb market. I personally think the best deals aren't usually at the Best Buy refurb or return market. Amazon Renewed is quite affordable, but as Tim indicated, you can have some problems with Amazon Refurbished because that's basically seller refurbished, not manufacturer. Apple has their own, and if you get a refurbished Apple from Apple, you will still have Apple Care, which means you can take it into the Apple Store if need be. And it'll be much less expensive, and you can buy an Apple Care contract. Then there are the manufacturers, which we've been discussing. Okay, back market is focused on refurbished equipment, extensive inventory, ease of searching, standardized grading. They grade theirs, excellent, good, and fair. Typically 5 to 15% less than Amazon Renewed. It depends. 12-month warranty, which is good. 30-day no questions asked returns. competitive pricing. And the cons, they are third-party sellers. The quality can vary. And it's kind of subjective what the cosmetic grading is. So Amazon Renewed, there's a large selection. Easy returns with Amazon policies. Quality varies by seller. Less consistent grading. Shorter warranty, often only 90 days. Limited search filters, and it's more involved to compare availability to your specs, although they do have a comparison tool. And there's a buyer beware about it. Apple, and also Dell, HP, and Lenovo outlets. These have the highest reliability, like new condition. Full manufacturer warranty, often up to 1 year. New battery in most cases, so they'll do the replacement, so you don't have to. The con is the prices can be higher and a more limited selection. Best Buy outlet, we didn't mention this one. These are often manufacturer certified. There are open boxed, which are barely used, and there are refurbished. They also sometimes have display models. Local returns are possible to the store. Moderate pricing. The cons. Inventory varies widely, and it's less specialized than back market. There are peer-to-peer markets like eBay, Swappa, Facebook Marketplace, Lexington Free Cycle, or your local Free Cycle, which would be, I think, Naperville has some stuff. They used to have something called Buku. And the pro is they're the lowest prices. The con, highest risk. Inconsistent or non-existent warranties. And you need technical confidence when you're buying from an independent seller. So there's a quick comparison in these slides. And back market seems to Steve to have the best balance. Amazon and Best Buy are the most convenient. The manufacturer is the safest, and peer-to-peer is the cheapest but the riskiest. And there's star ratings. So, refurbished equals high value. Managed risk with warranties, and back market is a strong default, and the manufacturer refurb is the safest option. Steve went through some of what he went through when he was getting a refurbished computer. Let's do a little bit here on battery health. You should, if you can, you should check the battery health. 80% plus is acceptable. Otherwise, you would kind of want to send it back or replace the battery. Battery replacement costs can be $50 to $200 for PCs, higher for Mac. His was $249. So a Mac battery replacement can be expensive. Factor that in. Some refurbs include a new battery. And here's some Apple Mac specific guidance. Intel Macs are flexible, but they are aging. Apple Silicon M1 Plus, best performance. Check the Mac OS support window. RAM and storage are not upgradable on Macs. Windows specific PCs. They're more upgradable, RAM, SSD, broader hardware variety, but watch out for low-end CPUs in some cheap models, and that includes some of the ARM PCs. Business class models are usually your best and safest bet. Dell Latitude's a good one, ThinkPad's another good one, Lenovo. And there are things about thermals and longevities. You should clean a refurb because of dust buildup, and check the fan noise and see if it overheats. And there are security things about doing a fresh install and BIOS update, driver updates. Disk encryption recommended. Avoid devices where you don't know the history. And he has an interesting concept, life cycle strategy, when to buy. Buy 2 to 3 years behind the current models, not much more. Use for about 3 to 5 years, and then replace before support ends. That gives you the best cost-performance balance. Okay, and then he went through some of the other things that he personally considered. Stop share. So that's the rundown. You guys want a link to all this?
One thing that I want to mention when you're buying, whether it's a used computer as is or a refurbished computer. After about somewhere between 3 and 6 years, the thermodynamics of the CPU and heatsink has a thermal paste, and the thermal paste dries out and becomes useless. So sometimes when you're getting the older equipment, if it seems to be running kind of hot, that's one of the first areas I look at, and I take it apart, take off the heat sink fan assembly, and then clean off the heat sink and the CPU chip and put good thermal paste back on, reassemble it, and that problem goes away.
So everybody here in the group, when you buy your laptop or your computer, you should ship it to Tim first.
Yeah.
Tim is going to replace the paste on all of them, but you got to get it from Tim's house.
And you got to pay his price.
That's right.
His labor
cheap.
costs about $10,000 an hour.
It's pretty expensive.
Actually, that only with a big steep discount. It's usually higher. But I've had good luck so far with a lot of just plain used equipment as is, and I even bought a couple that the way the vendor stated the situation as they knew it, I took a big gamble, and in both cases, I ended up being the winner, so to speak, because I paid very little because it was high risk, and at the same time, too, in some instances, it was very easy to fix and get going again properly. One of them was the CMOS battery for your real-time clock. Replace that, and suddenly all the problems that the person was having disappeared. I've had another one where I cleaned up the processor. For that one in particular, I got even a higher quality thermal paste than I normally use, and because they were saying it was running very hot, and I haven't had a problem since. But hardware repair on your own, you got to have the right tools, and you got to be a little mechanically aptitude for taking things apart and putting things together. If you got the aptitude, it's okay. But if you don't have the aptitude and you don't have the tools, don't even try it, because you can wreck the device. And that's what some people do. And that stuff ends up on like eBay and other places like that.
Bob, I see you posted some information.
These are the links.
Okay.
To the full presentation video, to a video that Steve used to prepare his presentation, and to his slides.
So there seems to be some interest in the group about purchasing a used PC. Those, I think, Harry, you were interested in going that route. Would you like to elaborate on what you're looking for?
No, just retrospectively. So over the last 6, 7, 8 years, I bought a total of 4, 2 from Amazon and 2 from Newegg. One word, Newegg. And I was lucky in all 4 cases. Now, they were Windows 10 machines. I don't know if that's going to make a difference down the road. But I have a machine, we've talked about it in past months, that's an i5 6500, technically doesn't support Windows 11. So I installed it through a workaround script, and we'll have to see. If that continues to work well, we're golden. If it begins to give me any kind of problems, then I will go buy another refurbished, using maybe one of the sources discussed tonight, or staying with Amazon or Newegg.
Now, one thing you have to watch out for with used Chromebooks, there's a couple of things. One, some private sellers are taking Chromebooks that belong to school districts and reselling them. And you could get into a lot of trouble with that.
The seller can or the buyer?
The buyer, it's possession of stolen property, and you'd be left with nothing.
Okay.
And you could be prosecuted. But the other thing is, and this is more likely to happen to you, you might be buying a Chromebook that's a few years old. Some Chromebooks have had life cycle support, update support, as short as 3 to 5 years in the past. It's much longer now. But you've got to really look up which firmware version it is, according to the model, and find out how long is its support window, and do you want a Chromebook that no longer receives updates?
A couple other factors. Stay away from ARM chip Chromebooks. This only applies to Intel and AMD processors. Number two, look at if you can get the information about the Chromebook from the manufacturer's site, and see if the storage device can be upgraded to a greater level, because most Chromebooks, especially in the past, only had 16 gigabytes, and if you were lucky, 32 gigabytes. I can run Linux in 32 gigabytes. 16 is next to impossible, but not absolutely impossible to do. And if you can get 64 or better, that's the ideal. So
yeah,
you got to be concerned about the upgradability. You probably will not be able to upgrade RAM memory at all.
Okay, so I've got a different question on this subject, though, of buying a used machine. To me, and let me throw this out there and tell me if I'm wrong or whatever. One of the risks of buying a used piece of computer or used computer hardware is the fact that it could come pre-infected. That is, the manufacturer had obtained a machine that had malware embedded in it somewhere in the BIOS or somewhere really deep in the system. How is you as a consumer who purchase a used piece of machine, how are you going to ascertain whether this is a safe device to use? What should you do?
There, to the best of my knowledge, no easy answer to that, because bottom line is the people who are making the malware are getting better and better at hiding infectious material in the hardware, like you mentioned, the BIOS, your storage drive areas, and some other places that you can't get to. And the detection programs, such as an AV program, even Malwarebytes, may not be able to detect it, because in a sense, it's being stored off the radar. You have no way of addressing that. But when you start using the system, all of a sudden that malware may be activated and come into your regular operating system and do harm to you one way or another.
So what can you do when you first get a machine to at least feel confident that you've done what you can do to detect any malware or anything, any viruses or something that could be preloaded on that machine?
One thing you do is update the BIOS. Hopefully there is a more recent update of the BIOS, but if you look at the manufacturer website, you might find a way to put the same version of the BIOS back in there, reflash it. If you have any difficulty doing that, and it's something they say you can do, usually a BIOS infection will lock itself in and prevent a BIOS upgrade.
So one of the things you're suggesting is to reflash the BIOS with the current firmware or the latest firmware.
The latest or current, yeah.
Right.
Yeah. That's what I usually do with all my equipment. Now, it used to be a long time ago, BIOS updates were so haphazardous that you could brick your computer, and it's usually due to infrequent knowledge about doing the upgrade. But that has dramatically changed for the last 5 to 10 years, where all you have to do is find the right version for your machine, the make and model, and download the most latest version of the BIOS, and right from within, say, Windows, possibly Linux in some cases, uh, you flash the BIOS, and when it reboots, you're up to date. And therefore, if you had a infected BIOS, that would be one way of getting rid of it. Another thing in used equipment these days is a lot of them are coming with no storage. So you have to provide your own storage. Therefore, you may not get an embedded virus that's in the storage drive. But also, most used gear these days, you either get 4 or 8 gigs of memory and not more than that in most instances. There are exceptions. There are people who are trying to get rid of their computer and get something newer and better for them. But anymore, it's because of the RAM shortage that's out there right now. 8 gigs usually is all you can expect to get.
And one other thing, if any peripherals, USB devices are provided with the computer, and it doesn't matter whether it's Apple or whether it's a PC, you might want to make sure that there's nothing wrong with those USB devices. There is a thing called bad USB that is a firmware-based attack that is not detectable with antivirus. There are ways of figuring out that a USB device is trying to present itself as something that it isn't, which is the basis for this attack. But it's not really possible to do that in Windows unless you're like a developer and know how to reverse engineer certain parts of Windows regarding how devices and drivers work. So if you have a copy of Linux, you might want to fire that up with a certain program called USB Guard and check the USB devices, see if they're coming up as what they are supposed to be.
Yeah, I haven't seen a system yet come with a USB device or even CD, DVD discs. So that may have been something in the past, but I haven't seen it in all my shopping around for parts and components,
Could,
let
could,
alone
could,
systems.
could that also apply to like a wireless mouse or wireless keyboard?
Usually no, but because they don't have usually the storage type media within them. They're straightforward electronics. So I'm unaware of any infection of keyboards and mice, whether
That's not true. Keyboards have been infected with bad USB, and they have come. They have done the very same kinds of exploits.
Shall we say anything
However,
is possible?
It's not that it's just possible. There have been documented cases
Right.
with keyboards, but the bad things are cables, charging cables. It's hard to test that they're good. It's hard to test that they function properly.
right.
And there are testers for cables.
Yeah, the USB cable is much more likely. The keyboards, I suspect if there's keyboards on it, it's the programmable ones, especially that you can change the color on. That is seductive to gamers, whereas the majority of people don't have that kind of a keyboard. They have plain vanilla, and there's no storage there to infect.
So we're buying a used machine. One of the safest things we could do would be to have it come with no drive, put in our own new drive, then load Windows on.
Well, I would be cautious there. If I can do it without installing the operating system, I would do that first. I wouldn't even put the drive in.
You would do what first?
I would do first BIOS update if I can do it through a USB drive and update the BIOS in case that was infected. Then I would install the SSD or a SATA 2.5-inch drive, and then I would install the OS. And the next thing I would do, if I've got Linux and I've played with it somewhat, I'll take a drive that has memtest on it, or I can download it on another machine, put it on a drive, and I'll run a memory test to check that memory that came with the machine to see if it passes or not. If it doesn't pass, that's a problem. And sometimes you can get with the vendor and they'll either send you a new memory stick or they will give you a discount on the sale of that device, meaning you get a credit back.
Memtest only works on Linux?
No.
It's memtest comes on most ISOs of Linux, not all, but most. And memtest is available for Windows-based machines. I don't know if it works on an Apple Macintosh.
Okay. Not everyone here in this group is comfortable in Linux, so we want to make sure that we cover them that they can do this in Windows.
You can get it for Windows. You have to install it to a flash drive that's bootable. It has to be a bootable Windows type flash drive. And you put the software on there and then you run it from that drive and it will go through your memory. It takes a while to run, depending on the horsepower of the computer and its speed, etc. It'll take a while for that to go through the whole test. When it goes through the first full time, it'll either say pass or fail. And if it failed, then you got a bad stick of memory probably. Unless it's you can double check to make sure that the memory module, when it's turned off, is seated correctly and rerun the test.
Yeah, there's a standalone version of it, and it boots from USB.
Right, which is what this says.
Yeah. It's a good piece of software. I use the Linux version because I can see if can I boot up into Linux? Can I run the mem test from that same USB device? I don't then have to download this standalone and get it flashed onto a flash drive to try and do the memory test. It all depends upon who you are and what you are into. A lot of people don't even want to mess with the hardware. They don't want to know anything about the hardware. They don't want to know anything about the operating system. They just want to know the software that they want to have and how it works to get the things done they want to do on the system.
Yeah, and the other thing about memtest or memtest 86 Plus, which is the bootable version, is you want to let it run. You want to let it run its default tests twice, because it might pass once, but it might not pass the second time. I had that happen on one RAM stick that went bad.
Well, I had one instance where it also passed the first pass. I didn't catch it because usually I just set up the machine, let it run, and I'm off doing other things. And when I came back, it had on the counter number of errors on the second pass.
Yep.
And it was something I really hadn't expected. I think it was the first time or second time that I ever did RAM test. But every machine for the last number of years, any memory that comes with the machine, I always test it. One of the first things I can do to see if that works. I then try and get the BIOS updated. I try and then add the storage and put on the operating system of my choice.
So is it common for a machine to have memory errors?
No,
The old,
say only a small percentage may have the problems in that, maybe less than 5%.
yeah, the older the machine, the more likely that could happen. And the other thing is, you'll often have two RAM sticks for the amount of RAM that you've got. If you know where to look in the tests, you can figure out which RAM stick has failed.
Pete? Wait,
Yeah.
Pete?
So here being in the middle of the Pacific, our air normally is like 2 to 3% salt. So anything that's older than 2 to 3 years and it's starting to act up, the first thing I do is I pull the sticks and I use the eraser trick and I clean all the contacts on all the memory sticks. And then I use alcohol to clean the sockets because half the time that's what's happening. I'm having faults because the memory is getting corroded. The contacts in the memory sticks are getting corroded.
That's good information. Also, too, in all the years I've been playing with the PCs and stuff like that, we're going back into the 80s at least. I've only had about half a dozen bad memory sticks. And I've had, I think, only a couple SSDs that failed. So I've had good luck as far as I'm concerned with both memory modules and storage devices, solid state type.
Yeah, my current tower developed an issue because of some direct contact that happened between a RAM stick and the cooling fins for the CPU. And it was direct heat transfer. And it was a specific spot on that RAM stick where MemTest caught the problem on the second pass. And it was right where that contact had been.
Another thing too, if you ever get a machine that has a spinning hard drive on it, run check disk and put the flags /R and /F because those two flags will check for bad conditions on the drive, and the R one will take an extensive diagnostics, finding bad spots, locking them out before you install any software like an operating system. That way, you know that the areas that are being checked out as good will not give you a headache with your operating system when you install it.
Okay, anyone else want to comment on this subject? Does anyone have any questions in regards to buying a used machine? Okay, let's go on to our next one. Please give me a topic number.
1,000.
No, it's not. There is no 1,000. There's a 10. Do I hear 2,000? 2,000 going once, twice. No.
I have to go back and find.
We're not trying to buy GPUs, discrete ones, and memory.
Well,
I did put it in the chat. Hopefully everyone got the updated one in the chat.
Number one about increasing your video RAM may relate to something I just did.
Okay, how to increase your video RAM.
If this has to do with integrated graphics, it's something I just did.
how about number 6?
Wait,
Well, we're doing number one Then we can do 6.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
We can do 6 later. So number 1, how to increase your video RAM.
Yeah, hold on, I'm trying to get there.
Yeah.
Okay. I was going to try it. This one, I watched the video and I was going to try to write it down as steps, but I figured it was easier just to show this video than to do that because there's several steps to do. But let's go at it.
Hello guys, welcome back to Byte Geek. In today's video, I'll show you how to increase your video graphics memory on both Windows 10 and Windows 11 PC. This method works for all major graphics manufacturers, whether you're using Intel, AMD, or NVIDIA integrated graphics, and can help improve your system performance and boost your FPS in games and applications. First, we'll check our current video memory and graphics manufacturer. To do this, simply right-click on your desktop. If you are using Windows 11, then click on Show More Options and select Display Settings. Then scroll down and click on Advanced Display Settings, and then select Display Adapter Properties for Display 1. Here, you'll find your graphics card information. In my case, it's Intel HD graphics. And as you can see, the total available graphics memory is 8,215 megabytes, but the dedicated video memory is just 128 megabytes, so it's time to increase that. Depending on your current VRAM, you can follow the values I'll show on screen to update your settings using the registry editor, based on different RAM sizes. And here's what you should follow. For 1 gigabyte RAM, set it to 128 megabytes. For 2 gigabytes RAM, set it to 256 megabytes. For 4 gigabytes RAM, set it to 512 megabytes. For 8 gigabytes RAM, set it to 2048 megabytes. For 16 gigabytes RAM, set it to 2096 megabytes. These are the recommended VRAM values based on your system's memory. Don't worry, I've also added all of this information in my YouTube description, so you can follow along easily. Alright, so first we need to open the registry editor to increase the VRAM on your Windows system. Close any open windows and then go to the search bar and type registry editor, or just re-get it, and choose Run as Administrator. Now the registry editor is open. Double click on H key local machine, then double click on software. Since I'm using integrated Intel graphics, I'll look for the Intel folder. If you're using a different graphics card like NVIDIA or AMD, just look for the appropriate folder. The steps will remain the same. Once you find your graphics manufacturer's folder, in my case it's Intel, right-click on the folder, choose New, then Key, and name the new key to GMM. Make sure all letters are uppercase, then press Enter. Next, select the newly created GMM folder, and on the right side, right-click, choose New, then DWord, 32-bit value. Now type this value exactly as it is, dedicated segment size, with D, S, and the second S capitalized, no spaces. Once it's created, double-click on dedicated segment size file. Now we need to check how much RAM is installed on your PC so we can set the correct value. Go back to the search bar, type system information, and open it. Look for the installed physical memory RAM. For example, mine shows 16 gigabytes RAM. Now based on your RAM size, set the value data accordingly. So for my system with 16 gigabytes of RAM, I'll enter 2096. Then click OK to save. After that, close the registry editor, then restart your PC. That's it. Once your system restarts, the VRAM will be updated, and you should notice improved performance and better FPS in games and applications. You can also update your graphics drivers through Device Manager. Right-click on Windows Start button, then click on Device Manager. Expand the Display Adapter section. Right-click on your graphics card and select Update Driver. Choose Search automatically for drivers and make sure your system is connected to the internet. If you see a message saying, the best drivers are already installed, Don't worry, you can visit your graphics card manufacturer's website, like Intel, AMD, or Nvidia, and manually download the latest driver from there. And that's how you can increase your video graphics memory on Windows 10 or 11. If you found this video helpful,
I recommend one thing before you try and do that with the registry editing, and I've been doing it for more than 25 years. Do a restore point before you do any reg edit function in case something got screwed up, that you made a mistake, a typo, whatever the case may be, because your system may not boot up normally, but you will be able to get into advanced troubleshooting tools and restore that restore point that you made, which covers what the original registry content was before you messed around with it. And your system should reboot right into a normal operation as if you did nothing.
Yes. By the way, there are newer CPUs like my laptop with an AMD Ryzen 7000 series. Mine's an AI 300. They have variable amounts of system RAM that can be dedicated to graphics. And they have a tool called AMD Adrenaline Edition, which allows you to make adjustments. I had periodic screen blackouts during boot up or other heavy loads that involved a lot of graphics and a lot of RAM use. I shifted some of the RAM to video, and it worked better. This was on the advice of the framework forums. So they and I knew what we were doing. We knew how much to adjust it and how to adjust it. Definitely.
What's the advantage of upgrading our video RAM in our system? What will it do for me as the average user? I'm not a gamer.
Average user may see little to nothing. It's when you get into real powerful graphic images, it could even be like, say, a Photoshop. But games in particular, some games are very light on the graphics. Other games are so darn heavy on the graphics, you may not even be able to provide it enough RAM from your shared memory, because that's what we're talking about in that video. You are sharing your main system RAM memory. It's not physical memory like in a discrete GPU card.
Does that mean that that memory is not going to be available for programs?
That's correct. 100%.
That's the trade-off.
That's the trade-off. So
that's the trade-off.
I'm allocating, let's say I had that 16 gigabyte system.
Right.
And he was allocating 2096, which would be what, 2 gigs?
Yeah.
He'd be allocating 2 gigs to video RAM. That means he will only have 14 gigs that he can load programs and operating, in a general terms, programs and operating system in, right?
Yeah.
Right. Here's the thing. If you're a power user, you're trying to do too many things at one time to fit all in memory, and you start using your page file in Windows, which is virtual memory, and that's slower than your RAM memory. So you have to cut back in some cases if you're allocating more of the system's RAM to video processing for higher graphics that are needed. But at the same time, too, you got to cut back on how many programs you have open, especially if they're intense in graphic presentation.
Pete?
Yeah, so if you're doing video editing and rendering and stuff like that, or CAD or games, you probably want more video memory. If you're using spreadsheets that have 30 pages and 15 tabs and ZZ and 3,000 rows, you probably want more standard memory rather than the video memory because you're going to be chunking through doing comparisons on spreadsheets.
Yes.
That's your two sides.
Right. Graphics is really something most of the average computer users don't run that much into. It's the gamers that are the biggest audience. And even there's a lot of people that are doing retro games. That's old style games that have low graphics impact, and they won't notice having a too little graphics memory. But boy, as they start moving up to mid-range and high-end games, that's when they're going to really notice that they've got a problem with graphics memory.
I don't know how AI actually affects where in the memory on the machine it affects the usage.
Well, that's quite questionable also, because that's something that's fairly new, and GPUs and their memory are very important to the AI processing. However, in general, it's usually a discrete GPU card, not the onboard mother board type GPU that has little real dedicated memory. So a system that has too little graphics processor support is going to struggle because the CPU is going to have to render everything. And in AI, it will get real slow.
Anyone else? So for generally, most of us won't need to change our video RAM.
Probably not most. If you have somebody who plays mid-range to high-end games on their system, odds are they've already got either a NVIDIA or AMD Radeon type.
But looking at this group here, I think you also said if you did a lot more CAD work.
That's
so
true.
People here in this group, in general, may have 3D printers, and they may be doing CAD work to send stuff to their 3D printer. So they would benefit from having more video RAM allocated.
Yeah, but this kind of video RAM may not help you as much. Again, it will also reduce the amount of memory available to your application programs. However, usually when you have high-end gamers and people that are trying to do local LLM AI databases and things like the CAD programming, etc., now you're talking, they'll usually have a dedicated GPU card with 8 to 32 gigabytes of real memory on board the card, and it doesn't use your main memory that's available to all your applications.
So on the CAD side, if you're just drawing lines on a screen, like for a 3D printer and stuff like that, you're not using a lot of screen resolution. If you're using like Autodesk where you're doing assemblies and you're shading the assemblies, now you need some real horsepower on the graphics side.
Right.
The rendering or converting to a slicer program, that is not very intensive because it's just changing it to G code because they're not worried about the colors. They're just worried about the direction and the length of the individual lines that you're drawing.
Yes, and it's a case where each individual has to evaluate what they are trying to do with their equipment to determine what the needs really are for them to do what they want to do. If you don't have a need for a discrete GPU card, that's great. That saves a lot of money. I'm not joking when I say that. But at the same time, too, that's where you're at the lower end. Now, this expanding the use of your main system memory for the onboard graphics chip might still provide some benefit in some instances.
So when I was picking out my first machine after I started with Fusion 360 Autodesk, I picked out a basic gamer's platform because that's got a little bit higher on the graphics, got a little bit higher on the regular RAM, and a little bit larger hard drive. And that handled Fusion 360 quite well.
Yes.
Now on my 11 machine, which is a Nook, a small box, it's got a graphics card that can actually put out to three or four HDMI monitors. So it's got a pretty decent graphics card in it, and it's got, I think I got 32 gig of RAM when I ordered it. So I'm full up on the RAM, and it handles it quite well. So what you got to do is like if you're buying a car for yourself, do you need that SUV, or can you get by with a little car to get you back, a smart car to get you to the store and back in a neighborhood? That's the sort of balancing act you have to do. Do you need the SUV? Are you going to pull a boat? Going to pull a trailer? Are you going to haul a lot of stuff, or are you just going to haul 2 shopping bags with 2 people?
Depends if you got to look good.
You can get a fancy smart car. You can get all sorts of colors on those panels. You can look good in a smart car.
Yes, you can. You can. I'm not denying. Okay. All right. We covered that subject. I think, I ran across that. I thought it would be of interest. I went down that road. I made some changes on my system. Did I notice anything different? Absolutely not.
No, because you're probably not pushing it, and most people are not pushing their equipment either. This is why it has the onboard graphics processor on the motherboard, and most business computers don't need anything more than that. If anything, they might need more RAM memory than, say, 8 gigs, especially with Windows 11. You need 16 or better with Windows 11 anymore. So you have to understand that a business only wants to get the cheapest, reliable system for doing their regular business. They may have one or more machines that are high end that have discrete graphics cards, 32 to 64 gigs of memory, something like that. But it's for a few people employed in the business to do specific tasks.
Would this help Drew at all with VMs?
Pardon?
Would this help Drew with his VMs that he runs?
What help?
Allocating video RAM. Or is that
I don't need to do that. I have a gaming PC that has a strong graphics adapter, dedicated graphics, and 64 gigs of RAM.
Okay.
Yeah,
so that's when you want to run your games, you use that box.
Yeah, well, he can get anybody can get gaming laptops, and they will come with NVIDIA or Radeon processors with a certain amount of memory in them. But they're kind of limited because everything's so compact. Airflow becomes a big problem.
Right. Okay. Let's stay on subject here. Anyone else? I want to get through another subject if we can. Anyone else have any questions on video RAM? Okay, pick out a new subject. Give me a number.
6.
6. Didn't we do 6? No, that was 7 we did. 6. clipboard history screenshots. All right. So Windows Clipboard history allows us to store and access multiple copies of items, including text, HTML, blah, 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 whatever we put in there, by pressing the Windows key and the letter V. This feature must be enabled in the settings and can hold up to 25 items. Screenshots can be taken with the Windows Shift and S key. Automatically goes to the history until the device restarts. So if we do, what is it, Windows V?
Yep.
And okay, let me do this share so you guys can see.
And
then I do back to Zoom.
Now, is the clipboard history on by default, or do you have to turn it on?
I think you might have to turn it on.
Yeah, you have to turn it on.
All right, so where do we turn that on?
That's in privacy and security, if I remember right.
Okay, so let me go and find this. Privacy first. Privacy. Microphone privacy.
It's in your settings.
Clipboard settings.
Yeah.
Clipboard settings. There we go.
You can clear the data. You can put clipboard history on.
Okay, as you see, I have this radio box checked and turned on, so clipboard history is enabled on my system.
Yeah.
The feature is only available if your Microsoft account is syncing with Windows.
For if you want to do it across devices, correct?
No, clipboard history depends upon that.
Yeah, you have to have a Microsoft account, and you have to be logged into it.
Yep.
Okay, so now we've checked. Sorry.
I have an alternate solution. The reason I picked this topic is I have an alternate solution that has the thing that I don't like about the built-in Microsoft history is it's not persistent. So if you reboot your computer, your history is gone. I use a third-party clipboard manager that I'm putting in the chat right now called CopyQ. And you can adjust the history. It defaults to 200 items. And it's persistent from reboot to reboot.
Does it hold screenshots?
Yes, it does. And it even has a tab feature. And what I do is I create a tab called Linux. And every time I ask ChatGPT for a new Linux command line command that I can't remember, I put it into the CopyQ. And then I can, in the future, paste it into a window if I need to.
So does this work on both Windows and Linux?
Yes, it does.
So this is CopyQ. I'm on the downloads page. Look at all this change stuff, fixed. Which one do I get? How do you know?
Well, you get the one that says EXE.
The one that says
down below. You got to go
backwards.
Scroll down a little bit to the assets.
Yeah.
Here. Screenshots. Features. Install. Windows.
Oh, you can download the installer right from there.
Right.
Okay. Installer. Took me to this screen.
Scroll down a little bit.
Hold on, I gotta get there.
Until you see assets.
Yeah.
And then look for the setup.exe.
There it is. And I think it got downloaded.
And if you want to run it as a portable, you can download the zip.
Hopefully I won't blow up my machine here. Man, you gotta approve all this stuff. Plugins, highlights, notes.
I don't see what you're doing. All I see is the browser window.
Oh, sorry. Here, let me do this. Share. There you go. So I'm at the install dialog here. It's giving me all the good stuff that you click and you just next, next. Automatically start.
And then I start it automatically so that it when I reboot Windows, it's there.
Right.
And then by default, I think it automatically opens by typing in Control tilde.
Control tilde. Oh, there it is. No, Control Shift tilde. Nope, that didn't do it.
Control Shift and the key between Escape and the Tab key.
No, you don't need the Shift key. It's just Control and the little hyphen underneath the tilde.
It didn't like my Control hyphen.
Maybe you have to go. You know what? Maybe you have to go into Preferences and set that up. Oh, you know what? Look at your system tray.
All right, so Windows still there. All right, settings.
And then tray notifications tab, shortcuts. Oh, you can define the shortcut. It may not be there by default.
There it is.
Show and hide.
CopyQ.
And then if you go into settings or preferences, and then shortcuts, you can define your own startup key.
I think you guys can see what I'm doing here.
To show and hide the main menu.
Okay. Windows, do this. All right, this should be a dialog box for CopyQ. Oh, it keeps going away.
Yeah, it goes away if you tap something other than the box.
All right, so what do we want to do? Preferences?
Yeah, you've got it hidden again. You didn't share your whole desktop.
I thought I did. Share. Can you see this dialog box?
Nope.
No. Something's then I can't show it to you.
Want me to show it off?
Go ahead.
Let me share my entire screen and say share. And so when let me cancel out of this. When I have, this is the main menu, and you can see that it comes with the tab called clipboard. I've created other tabs called Linux and PowerShell. But if you go to File and then Preferences and then Shortcuts and then Show Hide Main Menu, you can set your own shortcut key. And by default, Show the Tray menu is Control-Alt-T, but Show and Hide the Main Menu may not be there by default. And then what's nice about it is I can define an entry. So like, for example, this one says sudo mount -t p:, but maybe I don't remember what that is. So I can say item and then edit notes. And I can say mount pcloud and hit save. Now I have title here, So I know that this command is from my pCloud, and you just highlight the command that you want and double click on it, and it will paste it into wherever your cursor is. And then if you have, like I do, Windows and Linux, you export your clipboard data, and you can do tab or all of them, and then import them into your Linux machines. They match. So if I were to go to my command terminal. Let's say I go into a terminal window. I bring up the clipboard, and then I can say, just double click on it, and it should automatically it automatically types it into the box. So it's really nice. Anyway, that's CopyQ.
Thank you, Drew.
And yes, there is a portable version, and I downloaded that so that I can fire it up or just leave it hang around.
All right, we have time for one more subject. I hope.
Well, if we don't have a subject pick, I am, as some of you may know, an rclone user, and there's a company that is developing or has developed a new graphical user interface for it, and it's called rclone UI. And I volunteer and provide tech support to the rclone user base, and they have an entry in there, and I posted on their forum the other day to somebody that I do Zoom presentations about rclone graphics, and they stumbled across it, and they sent me a direct memo asking me if they could provide me with complimentary codes. But, they have a free and a paid version, and they asked me if they could provide me with complimentary codes that I could hand out to people during Zoom meetings. So I said yes. Now I'm just waiting for them to do that. So probably next month I'll be able to hand out a code if anybody wants to use it.
Oh, that'd be nice. Thank you, Drew. Any other last questions or comments for the group?
Our clone is a Linux-based syncing program, and you may be able to put it on other platforms like a Windows, but you have to do extra installing. Normal rsync comes with, our clone comes with most Linux distros.
Yeah, the one that comes, if you install Mint, the one that comes with the distro is an outdated old version. For Linux, on the rclone.org website, on their download page, they provide a script, and you just copy that script and paste it into a terminal window, and it automatically downloads and installs the newest for Linux. It's available for Mac. It's available for those. The Windows version is merely a zip file, and you unzip the file, and there's a file in there called rclone.exe, and you just put it wherever you want it and run it. rclone UI taps into that program and gives you a graphical user interface to manage rclone without having to do command line options.
Thank you, Drew. With that, I'm going to stop recording our show. We are done for the evening. Yes.